Free as a bird. That phrase expresses our appreciation of a bird in full flight, seemingly free of even the responsibility of gravity. Birds of a feather flock together is our way of recognizing the importance of kinship for social beings. It's ironic that so few birds have the opportunity to fly or flock together when we keep them as pets. The impact of the pet trade on wild bird populations and the restrictions imposed upon birds in captivity have led many people to question, should birds be kept as pets at all? Birds are not domesticated animals, whether caught in the wild or bred in captivity. Domestic animals, such as dogs and cats, are distinct from their wild ancestors in that they have been bred for hundreds of years to live in the care of humans. Birds, commonly kept as pets, are no different than their wild relatives. They are the native species of other countries. All parrots in the United States today originated from birds who were captured in the wild. The wild bird trade may be one of the cruelest activities ever imposed upon innocent animals. The initial shock of losing their freedom and being confined to a cage can kill 10 to 20% of wild-caught birds. Of those who survive capture, half will die of starvation, dehydration, suffocation, or disease before export to large importing countries in Europe and Asia. Not only is this trade cruel, for most threatened parrots it is the primary cause of dramatic declines in populations. The parrot family has more globally threatened species than any other family of birds. In 1992, the U.S. Congress learned that the international pet trade in wild-caught birds contributes greatly to the decline of species in the wild, and that the trade produces an unacceptably high rate of mortality among imported animals. As a result, Congress passed the Wild Bird Conservation Act, which transformed the United States from the largest importer of wild-caught birds to one of the smallest. This important piece of legislation was strongly opposed by the American Federation of Aviculture and others who breed, sell, or trade birds. So as University of California, Berkeley Environmental Science Department Chairman Stephen Beissinger explains, it didn't come easy.
It was a real struggle to get a Wild Bird Conservation Act passed. Such an act was attempted a number of times in the 70s and 80s and always failed. And it failed in part because the handful of individuals that imported birds were well organized and worked against it. It failed in part because the Federation of Aviculturists fought against having any kind of regulation of this type. And mainly because a lot of aviculturists just wanted to have the opportunity to get wild stock for their breeding, especially of rarer species. And there was no organization of the bloodlines to manage for their own genetic diversity.
One of the most common assertions made by breeders of exotic birds is that captive breeding is necessary to keep the birds from becoming endangered. However, Beissinger says captive breeding contributes little or nothing to saving species in the wild.
Once a bird comes out of the wild, starts to come into captivity for several generations, it loses its survival skills. It now has been selected to be a domestic bird, and rarely can we reproduce the kinds of skills that they need to survive in the wild. So the value of most of these birds for conservation for wild populations is pretty low.
Because birds are not domesticated, they are less suitable or unsuitable as companion animals. When considering the welfare of captive birds, many have concluded that it is inherently cruel to keep an intelligent, social, and active animal adapted to flight confined to a cage that is too small to facilitate normal behavior. Harvard University animal behavior scientist Michael Schindlinger has studied wild parrots and says they fare poorly in captive environments.
Captive parrots are generally kept in such a way that they're left alone for many hours throughout the day. This is in stark contrast to wild parrots, which are nearly always in the company of social conspecifics. What this means to me is that they're living essentially in social deprivation, which can lead to, in many species, maladaptive behavior or even depression on the part of the animal, listlessness, hostility, etc., when they're kept socially isolated. marked difference is that wild parrots are almost never alone. They fly in pairs, trios, or larger flocks all the time. And they even congregate into nightly roosts of dozens to hundreds to even thousands in some areas. So there's just no way we can provide a pet bird with that level of social interaction.
Those who acquire birds as companion animals soon discover that parrots, including lovebirds, budgies, parakeets, and cockatiels, are noisy, messy, and can be destructive. Vocalizing, that is, squawking, chirping, and talking, is an important part of any parrot's social communication. Birds eat continually throughout the day, dropping and discarding bits of food everywhere. Birds are instinctively programmed to chew and shred wood, whether it is a perch, toy, picture frame, or furniture. Birds will also chew electrical cords, paper, and curtains. University of California Davis graduate student Rebecca Fox, who has studied avian behavior, says people don't realize the complexities of caring for parrots.
There's a big perception problem. People think you get a bird, you stick it in a cage, you feed it seeds. At this point, I think we've caught up enough to say, maybe you give it a couple of toys and it'll be okay. But I think people are all still thinking in dog and cat terms, that these are animals that are sort of built to be kept in captivity, and they're not. They're a generation removed from the wild. These are a generation ago, or 2 generations ago, their parents or grandparents were living in huge flocks, foraging over, really amazing distances with lots of social interaction. They weren't confined, used to eating a huge variety of food, seeing a lot of different things, coping with a lot of different situations. And you're taking a bird that still has the instincts to do all that and expecting it to live peacefully in a cage. And the truth is, unless you've got a bird that is just really abnormal, it's not going to happen.
Birds are meant to fly and to be with other birds. The deprivation of these natural behaviors and confinement in cages can lead to neurotic behavior, excessive noise, self-mutilation, and other destructive habits.
Some birds do develop plucking problems, some birds scream a lot, some birds become very aggressive when they hit puberty. And I think people really need to know what can happen before they go out and buy this sweet little baby bundle of feathers that they think is always going to be perfect.
Parrots are extremely intelligent and social. They have been compared to human toddlers in the needs of their emotional and social lives, but unlike children, they never grow up. As a result, very few people are capable of caring for the special needs of exotic birds or comprehend the seriousness of the commitment for the bird's lifespan, 20 to 70 years or more, depending on species. Each year, thousands of birds are sold into the pet trade to people who are under the mistaken impression that a bird will make an intriguing and low-maintenance pet. Eventually, whether due to frustration, disinterest, or actual concern for their welfare, many people try to rid themselves of the responsibility of caring for their birds. Unfortunately, few of these birds will find a loving home, and most will spend their days isolated and confined to their cages. Others will bounce from home to home as owners tire of them, and some may be abandoned at local shelters and bird rescues, or set free to fend for themselves, where most will succumb to the elements, starvation, or predation. There are currently over 90 self-described bird rescues or sanctuaries in the United States, many of which have come into existence in just the last few years, with several already filled to capacity. Eileen McCarthy founded and directs the Midwest Avian Adoption and Rescue Service, which, like so many other bird rescue groups, sees a growing problem.
We were astounded by the numbers of birds we started getting in. Many of the birds that we see have suffered years of boredom, isolation, neglect, even abuse. They have been languishing in small, filthy cages, in dark rooms, in corners, people's houses, in basements, in closets. Many birds have spent, most of their day covered up because they've been too noisy. This is something that I think is more common than we care to think about.
While problems faced by captive parrots in the United States continues to grow, so do the problems for wild parrots. Wild-caught birds are still traded within their countries of origin and legally imported into Europe and Asia. At least 1 million birds are imported into the European Union each year. With high mortality, hundreds of birds of different species traded, a myriad of inconsistent and insufficient laws, and the abundance of illegal trafficking, it is impossible to track the exact numbers of birds that fall victim to the wild bird trade. One of the best ways to protect parrots in the wild and captivity may be to eliminate the demand for them as pets.
There'll always be some people who will go outside the law and attempt to illegally bring in birds to augment their captive collection. And I think that's always going to happen. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has actually had a number of instances where they've caught people doing that kind of thing. We can make some headway in decreasing the pet trade if we could find some ways to make it less trendy to own birds. It would be nice to be able to think about ways to actually decrease the desire to have birds for pets.
I mean, I often tell people, instead of spending that $1,200 to buy a large parrot, why don't you spend the money on a plane ticket and have a vacation that you will never forget, spending a week or two with those wild parrots. And the value of that, not only in terms of your own experience and bringing that experience back to share with other people, but the value of it in terms of showing local people who live where those parrots are still free that those birds are worth a lot to them economically as wild birds.
History has shown that the increased popularity of exotic animals as pets leads to the subsequent increase of the illegal trafficking of their wild counterparts, whether the animals are captive-bred or wild-caught. As long as there's a demand and profits to be made, there will be a demand to take animals out of the wild, whether it's for people keeping them as pets, for dealers who want to use them as merchandise, or breeders who are seeking new genetic stock for their aviaries. To protect birds, it's going to take a paradigm shift for people to start seeing birds as they are, as wild animals, and being able to love birds and appreciate birds, but realize that that love does not manifest itself in holding it captive in your home. That we can love birds and appreciate them and leave them alone in the wild where they belong.
He sways side to side and forgets he's there and forgets what's where. He sways side to side, a channeler of lost tribes. An owl in a redwood tree, he's rediscovering me. An owl in a cedar tree, he's remembering he's free. Let him be. He sways side to side, a voice to be heard, a voice to be understood. A voice from a desert walk who never sought for peace outside of his own pieces. An owl in a redwood tree, he's rediscovering me. An owl in a cedar tree, he's remembering he is free. Let him be, set him free.